That's a great question. It's a difficult question, but it's a question that really does need to be addressed. So let me tackle it in three ways. By starting with first, the current landscape on regulation for AI is, I would say, chaotic. It's dominated by vested interests at the firm, the national, the regional levels. And in fact, many of the firms that are active in this space like this situation because it allows them to escape scrutiny. So it's not, it's about as far away from citizen-centric as you could possibly get. Rules that are transparent, and in fact, they're not transparent right now. Can anyone really read the consent agreements with a platform and understand them? I read recently that I think it would take hundreds of hours for everyone to read the consent agreements for all of the apps that they use. And of course, that doesn't even imply understanding of what those mean. So there's a lack of accountability, there's a lack of enforcement. I don't think most people know how their personal data are being used, and or probably more importantly, how they're being misused. So my third point is obviously we need better governance, and we need not just national governance, we need global governance because the firms that operate in this space are truly global in operation, and so we need that global coherence to match the operations of the social media platforms. So what can we do? Well, we can define rules, global rules on how data are being used, how the control over data, how data, the portability of data, the privacy, the cyber rules around data. And we can do this, and we can do this by setting standards. Now, India is the world's largest democracy. It actually has the world's largest digital identity program. And right now, it is making a concerted effort on data governance. So India can actually lead the way. There's a lot of countries out there looking for leadership, especially in the developing world. And India can be the champion for these countries. Now, Canada, of course, is a part of the G7. We're also a democracy. And both Canada and India are two of the founding members of something called the Global Partnership on AI, which is housed at the OECD. And I think together, Canada and India, working with this group, can push forward, I think, the values that we want to see associated with the use of our data. Follow up on what I've just said, and maybe to take a step back, there are in fact these three, what we call the three data realms. There's China, great firewall, takes the data of its citizens and creates national champions, and also uses other mechanisms to espouse its values and its technology throughout the world, including Belt and Road. We have the United States, which in some senses is very similar to China, and in some ways the exact opposite. It espouses open data flows, so the opposite of China, but in practice, what those open data flows mean is that virtually all the data in the world outside of China go back to the US and help them create their own national champions. And the lightly regulated approach helps reinforce that. And then we have Europe sitting in the middle, which basically looks at these two realms and says, we're going to compete by putting actual rules in place. And they created something called the General Data Protection Regulation. That is their mechanism to do that. So there's these realms, and the rest of us are sitting outside those realms, like India, like Canada. And I actually think because there's actually more of us in terms of the population sitting outside the realms than inside, together we can actually come together and try and do something about this environment and make sure that it reflects, our values and what we'd like to see, how our data are used. Now, with respect to e-commerce, I think one thing is we don't want to think about e-commerce too narrowly. So there are lots of technical issues around trade that will be dealt with e-commerce, and there's some difficult ones like customs duties around things that are shared through e-commerce. And I don't want to diminish the importance of those, but I really think e-commerce has to be thought of much more broadly. And some of the issues we're discussing right now, like data, like privacy, like cyber. These things are actually all intertwined and affect the competitive environment in which our firms operate. So, for example, rules around privacy and portability of data are going to affect the competitive environment. And so we need to think about these together when we think about trade. But I think my final point would be, in going back to my earlier point on this chaotic global environment on regulation, we need a global governance structure to try and bring not only these data realms together and find a way to take these competing interests and not only put them on the table, find a way to break down the barriers, but we need a way to bring all the other countries to the table as well. So at CG, at the organization where I work, we propose what we call a digital stability board. And it's a framework to allow this global cooperation to exist. And looking ahead, India will be taking over the G20 presidency in just over a year. And India's leadership to bring, to try and champion all the people outside the data realms and with the data realms at the G20 table is it's a great opportunity for India just to take charge. As I say, there's a framework out there for global cooperation, which is modeled after the Financial Stability Board, which was actually created by the G20 to deal with the mess after in the wake of the great financial crisis. So there's a mechanism that we propose that I think India could champion, or something along those lines.